The Magic School Bus Inside a Hurricane by Joanna Cole and Bruce Deegan. Have you heard about our teacher, Miss Frizzle? Her clothes are wild, her school bus is wacky, and her class trips are weird. Whenever we study something in her class, we get into it in a really big way. We were learning about weather. Absolutely everything in our room was about rain or snow or sun or wind. Every kid in the class was doing a weather project. We were even listening to weather reports on Miss Frizzle's radio. So we weren't surprised one morning when Miss Frizzle said, "It's a perfect day for a trip to the weather station." We hadn't finished our experiments about air, but with Frizzy at the wheel, we were going, ready or not. In no time, we were riding along in the old school bus. We were trying to get some music on the radio. We didn't see Miss Frizzle turning a strange little dial on the dashboard. We didn't notice that the bus was changing. All of a sudden, Dorothy Ann said, "Look!" We couldn't believe it. We were all wearing flying suits, and we were sitting in a basket. The bus had turned into a hot air balloon, and we were about to lift off. We started going up, and Miss Frizzle said, "Did I mention, children, that hot air rises?" We rose higher and higher. Even though hot air was filling the balloon, the air around us was growing colder. We had to put on warm jackets. Warm air rising from Earth carries lots of water vapor molecules, Miss Frizzle continued. As the air rises, it cools down. The water condenses in the air and forms clouds. We drifted into the center of a cloud. Miss Frizzle was right. It was damp in there. The cloud was made of tiny water droplets hanging in the air. Inside the cloud, droplets began coming together. They formed bigger and bigger drops. As the drops became heavier, they started falling. Down below, the weather forecasters were standing in the rain. They didn't see us inside the cloud, but we could hear their voices. One of them said, "I hope that teacher knows there's a hurricane watch in effect." As usual, Miss Frizzle paid no attention. She turned up the fire, and more hot air rushed into the balloon. As we rose above the cloud, the wind started pushing us south. Before long, we had traveled thousands of miles. Miss Frizzle said we were above a tropical ocean about 500 miles north of the equator. Below us, blue-green waves were sparkling. On a sandy island, palm trees were waving. It looked like a vacation paradise to us. But Frizzy said, "Class, we have now arrived at one of the world's hurricane breeding grounds." Class, remember that as hot air rises from the ocean's surface, the water vapor in the air condenses and forms clouds, said the Frizz. Down below, more hot air rushed in from all the sides to take place of the rising air. In the middle of the rising air, a column of sinking air formed. We started sinking with it. "Oh dear," said Miss Frizzle, "the balloon must have sprung a leak." Hot air was rushing out, and the balloon was plummeting fast. "Jump ship, class!" shouted the Frizz. She jumped overboard, and we went after her. Right away, we knew it was a big mistake. The wind was blowing the clouds into a huge circle. "The storm is starting to take on the typical shape of a hurricane. Isn't it fascinating, children?" shouted Miss Frizzle. It was more than fascinating, it was terrifying. We were caught in the edge of a storm, blowing around and around in a giant whirlwind. That whirlwind was a hurricane. In the clouds around us, huge bolts of lightning were flashing. We thought it was all over for us, but then we saw the bus again. It had become a weather plane, the kind that explores hurricanes. we tumbled into a rescue chute and fell onto the plane. That is, the bus? We mean the plane. Thunder crashed and boomed. We covered our ears. Miss Frizzle turned the plane and we headed straight towards the center of the storm. We had the feeling someone was missing. We flew through miles of thunderstorms and Miss Frizzle took roll call. Guess who was missing? Arnold! He had fallen and missed the plane. Miss Frizzy marked Arnold absent and flew straight into the storm. The farther in we went, the faster the winds blew. At last, we came to the inner hurricane and entered the eye wall, a ring of heavy clouds around the storm center. In the eye wall, the winds were blowing the fastest yet, and the rain was coming down in sheets. All around us were columns of air called hot towers or chimneys. They were sucking up more and more hot, moist air from the ocean. The heat energy from the air was feeding the storm and making it stronger. The plane was shaking, and so were we. Then suddenly, everything was quiet. Class, we have entered the eye, or the center, of the hurricane, announced Miss Frizzle. The ocean waves still crashed below, and the winds howled outside, but in the eye, only gentle breezes blew. Up above, the sky was blue and the sun was shining. We relaxed and enjoyed ourselves. We flew about 30 miles across the eye. Then the Frizz called out, "We will enter the other side of the eye wall now." "Don't go," we cried, but the plane was already on its way, back into the hurricane's fierce wind and rain. The entire hurricane was moving across the ocean toward land, and we were going with it. The right forward quarter of the hurricane as you are looking toward land has the strongest wind and rain and the highest ocean waves, shouted the Frizz. Naturally, she flew directly into that part. As the hurricane approached land, the wind pulled up trees by roots and blew the roofs off of houses. It also blew ashore a huge dome of water called the storm surge. The ocean rose 10 feet higher than usual, and on top of that, there were giant waves. We were horrified as we watched the storm surge sweep over the shore below. But that was nothing compared to the horror we felt when we heard the Frizz shouting above the sound of roaring water. "We seem to be running out of gas, children." Sure enough, the plane was dipping lower and lower. As we fell into the water, we saw Arnold waving to us from a nearby roof. Somehow, Arnold managed to get on the plane before we were swept away by the waves at the front edge of the hurricane. The water was creeping up the windows. The plane was going to sink for sure. Then, we saw a dark funnel shape coming our way. "I've seen that shape on TV," said Ralphie. "I've read about it in a book," said Keisha. The twister came right for us. The next thing we knew, it had picked us up and we were traveling by tornado. After a while, we felt a bump and looked around. The tornado had set us down gently. We were in our old school bus again. We were dressed in our regular clothes again. The hurricane was over, and we were at a gas station. Miss Frizzle filled up the tank and drove down the road as if nothing had happened. "As I said earlier, class, we are on our way to visit a weather station," she said. The weather forecasters at the station had a lot to tell us about hurricanes. We had a lot to tell them too. Finally, we drove back to school and finished up our weather projects. After that trip, we needed some time to relax. Miss Frizzle said we could have a party. We had great games, crazy dancing, and yummy snacks. And for a while, we didn't even think about Miss Frizzle's next class trip.